Okay, oh, good. That's working. I'm gonna do my best here to toggle between the two devices today. And I'm a stander-upper, so like to be able to move around on the earth as we're talking. So thank you so much. First of all, to the organizers of this incredible symposium, Sarah, for your leadership, and Kathy and all the other staff and organizers who supported this event. It's a tremendous honor to join the various speakers presenting here this week, and particularly my co-panelists. I also want to raise my hand, say thank you to the Native elders and tribal leaders who I've worked with over the last couple of years, and whose sharing of knowledge is what brings me here today. The information, the stories that they've entrusted me with have been a tremendous gift, and you will get to see many of their faces in the next few minutes. So I think it's appropriate to start a discussion about Bears Ears and decolonizing public lands, and what that means with an image of where we are in space and time when we talk about Bears Ears. I really appreciate this graphic because I think it reorients us to who's looking, which gaze is contemplating this landscape. Here you can see this is a map of Bears Ears National Monument, the area that 5 tribes worked to seek protection from the native eye in the context of Indian country, with the political boundaries that we know them as removed. And you'll see that Bears Ears lies at the sort of fanning up from the confluence of the Colorado River and the San Juan River in the heart of the Colorado Plateau, an area that is considered profoundly sacred to numerous tribes in this region. This is a map that goes into a little more detail, and you can see where Bears Ears lies in the greater United States geography. It is at the very southeastmost corner of Utah, just up from the Four Corners meeting of those states, and gives you a better idea of how nested into Indian country Bears Ears really is, lying just north of the Navajo Nation, and directly west of the Ute Mountain Ute lands, in an area of ancestral homeland that these tribes have inhabited and stewarded since time immemorial. But these are just maps. This is a rendering. What does the land feel like and look like to be on? And it is a remarkable landscape. 1.35 million acres, so diverse, ranging from deep arid canyons to high mountain woodlands, really serving as an island ecosystem in an otherwise very rugged area of our country. And it's a region that is replete with cultural and archaeological sites. Over 100,000 estimated cultural sites within the boundaries of Bears Ears National Monument, cliff dwellings, rock art panels, and thousands of other sites that tribal people regard as the dwelling places of the spirits of the ancient ones. And from what has been shared with me, these are places where when tribal folks go to visit, to be in these spaces, they're going to visit the ancestors. And it's not just a place where things happened, it's a place where tribes still continue in an unbroken tradition of cultural practice. Because this area provides a unique ecosystem in an otherwise fairly desert region, it's incredibly important for forest resources, including firewood, pinyon nuts gathering, game animals, and not least of all, by any means, is the spiritual value attached to Bears Ears. These places that Western science might recognize as archaeological sites, as I've noted, are places where, for tribal people, the stories and ceremonies and practices have been in continuous practice for millennia. And those practices are still ongoing today. Unfortunately, it's also an area that has been under considerable threat for a number of years. From looting and grave robbing, you can see the attempted theft of this rock art panel here, mining and extraction, particularly oil, gas, uranium, potash, indiscriminate off-road vehicle use, and privatization. So it was these threats that motivated a number of tribal elders, native grassroots leaders in 2010 to come together and form Utah Diné Bikéyah, a native-led grassroots nonprofit organization that I've had the honor of working for 3 years now. Utah Diné Bikéyah is translates in Navajo as people's sacred lands. And the emphasis was always on protecting this area that is so central to the identity, cosmology, and survival of Native people in southeast Utah. And so Utah Diné Bikéyah, or UDB, as you'll hear me refer to it, really laid the groundwork for Bears Ears National Monument, did the grassroots on-the-ground organizing for years. And then, to fast forward for purposes of today, so much nuance in between, in 2015, the organization really handed up the initiative to what became the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, a group of 5 tribes came together in order to protect this area of sacred ancestral homeland for all tribes and all people. And that included the Navajo Nation, the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, the Hopi Tribe, the Ute Tribe of the Uinta-Ouray Reservation, and the Pueblo of Zuni. And for everyone who is familiar at all with tribal politics in the American Southwest, the idea of Hopi and Navajo being together on any kind of initiative is a remarkable achievement unto itself. And at the time when the coalition formed, Hopi and Navajo were co-chairs and continue to work side by side. So simply the establishment of the coalition in a lot of ways was historic to begin with. And so I want to just orient us for a second, because UDB had done a considerable, as I mentioned, a considerable amount of work both on the ground and philosophically, if you will, around how to do this work and how to do it in the right way. And so developing the core orienting values of how to proceed with the Bears Ears Initiative, how to protect these lands, was really focused on relationships as they interplay with culture and land protection. And all of that orients around the really central concept of healing. This was always the orienting force of Bears Ears and remains the driving trajectory. And it was an ethos, an ethic that the tribal coalition really embraced and ran with. And in a mere 3 months after forming the coalition, the Intertribal Coalition presented the formal Bears Ears National Monument proposal in October of 2015. A document that is, I'm sure, will go down in the annals of history itself, because it represented the first time in U.S. history that any tribal nation, much less a coalition of tribes, had called on a president of the United States to use the authority under the 1906 Antiquities Act to protect an area of land because of its significance and within the light of the wisdom of tribal knowing about an area, to protect it for that reason. And that's important, I think, because of the origin of the Antiquities Act. In 1906, early in the 20th century, Mesa Verde, which is just 60 miles as the crow flies from Bears Ears, so really within the greater Bears Ears region, was seeing intense looting. Artifacts were being shipped out by the trainload to museums in Europe, and Americans, Euro-Americans, white Americans were up in arms. They said, this can't go to Europe. This is our legacy. This is our antiquities. And of course, the story runs much deeper than that. As we know, in fact, these are native objects and the objects of the ancestors. But that was the origin of the Antiquities Act, and it gave presidents the authority to declare historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects of historic or scientific interest as national monuments. Now, 16 presidents since Teddy Roosevelt have designated national monuments, all but 3 on both sides of the party lines. And 23 existing national monuments today include major Native American sites. But as I said, this is the first time in Bears Ears that tribes themselves had called for a national monument to be designated. And suffice it to say, after a lot of on-the-ground organizing and a lot of meeting with decision makers and pushing this initiative forward, on December 28, 2016, President Obama designated Bears Ears National Monument, the first Native American national monument in U.S. history. And I appreciated a comment that Robin Wall Kimmerer made here in Eugene a few weeks ago when she was here. Hopefully some of you got to catch her incredible presentation. And she called the designation of Bears Ears National Monument a historic act of truth and reconciliation. And I'll talk more about why that depth matters so much. And I think one of the things we can observe from it, one of the things that makes it so remarkable was the proclamation itself, the language of the document that recognized the first Native American national monument. And within that proclamation included language recognizing the tribe's profoundly sacred relationship to these landscapes. This is a President of the United States purporting language that recognizes the sanctity of land to Native people. And significantly as well, the proclamation, recognized the value of traditional ecological knowledge as an object, so to speak, that deserved to be protected in its own right. And not only deserved to be protected, but was crucial to the administration and management of the monument. So the proclamation called for the creation of a Bears Ears Commission and a collaborative management structure in order to integrate tribal knowledge into the management and preservation of this place. Let's walk up here. I think we were here. Okay. You guys got a preview. So the collaborative management structure created the Bears Ears Commission. Really, the commission was part of the vision of Bears Ears from the very get-go. It was crucial to the designation of this area, and it was something that the tribes reiterated again and again. And it includes a seat for each of the 5 tribes to provide direct guidance and an advisory authority over the monument to BLM and National Forest, which are the 2 federal agencies that administer the lands within Bears Ears. All of Bears Ears was federal land to begin with. The Antiquities Act, despite what some may try to purport, does not give a president authority to take land from states or private landowners. And so the commission is charged with collaboratively managing this monument. And they are underway with this process, despite the goings-on that we'll talk about in a few minutes. The team is assembled and meeting actively with BLM and National Forest managers on the ground and building those relationships. Now, of course, there's been some 2 steps forward, 1 step back, as often is the course of history. But this was a fundamental piece of the vision of Bears Ears National Monument. And as Philip Vicente from Zuni articulated, it's only through collaborative management that Native people have real influence about how this sacred landscape is managed. And Regina Lopez White Skunk, a former councilwoman for Ute Mountain Ute, who was a major force in this initiative as well, spoke about the desire to create a voice that the federal government will listen to. And so I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about this idea of listening, because it really was a critical practice in the designation of Bears Ears National Monument, and I think it's really at the heart of where we have to go if we truly intend to decolonize our public lands. And it starts, of course, with listening to the land, which tribal people have been doing for millennia, for countless generations. And that traditional knowledge is held today by knowledge keepers and elders like John Holliday, a Navajo elder from El Jayto, who passed away just last year at the age of 100. And so one of the first tasks, one of the first undertakings of UDB was to conduct these elder interviews in order to create a map of the cultural knowledge, the significance of the area through the lens of those who carry the collective wisdom of countless generations. Then it came to tribes listening to tribes, which, as I mentioned, made the coalition to begin with a remarkable achievement, and building that process of understanding what makes this area important to the different people for whom it represents their ancestral homelands. Crucially, of course, was the federal government listening to the tribes. And I want to give props to the prior administration for the time they took and the patience they had and the deep listening that I think really did take place. The hours spent recognizing that in order to heal, we have to first see those wounds and listen to those wounds. For Navajo people, for example, Bears Ears is an area where during the Long Walk, when the Navajo people were forcibly relocated to Fort Sumner, a band hid out for several years within Bears Ears. And Chief Manuelito, who's a revered leader from Navajo, was born in this area. So to understand the depth of connection, a lot of listening had to take place. And to their credit as well, the feds at that point also helped facilitate community members listening to community members. So in July of 2016, Secretary Sally Jewell convened a listening session in Bluff, Utah, which is a town of about 200 or 300 people, and more than 2,000 people turned out to attend this listening session in 100-degree heat. It was a lottery system where folks spoke for 2 minutes at a time about what Bears Ears means to them and why it should or shouldn't be protected. It was a really important process and not easy, but I think a crucial step. So the public participation was deep on Bears Ears. And finally, I think maybe there was also some listening to prayers, because certainly on December 28th, 2016, those prayers were answered. And it was a time of celebration and achievement for people like Mary Jane Nazi, a Ute Mountain Ute elder and one of the language keepers in her community, who had worked on this issue for years and who grew up in and immediately adjacent to Bears Ears. To see this place protected and to see the stake that her community has in these lands recognized at the highest levels of the federal government. And so celebration was deep, but it was short-lived in a way. And I think what we've seen in the last few months is really the product of not listening and failing to open our ears. These are just some of the faces that we know now from who've been also involved. Senator Orrin Hatch here, speaking in that image in 2016, late 2016, senior most senator for the United States Senate, I would mention, representing Utah, said this: "The Indians, they don't fully understand that a lot of the things that they currently take for granted on these lands, they won't be able to do if it's made into a monument or a wilderness." And when pressed on that, he responded, "Just take my word for it." So this is what tribes are up against in Utah, and these have been the forces against Bears Ears. Governor Herbert here on the right said in 26, he referred to the Bears Ears proposal as a political tomahawk. And Ryan Zinke, who at his Senate confirmation hearing to become Secretary of the Interior, said, "I have great respect for Indian nations, and we need to listen to that voice." When it came to the National Monument Review that Trump directed Zinke to undertake in April of 2016, Zinke spent 4 days in Utah and 1 hour with tribes. So listening can make or break this process. And as probably many of you know, in early December, President Trump purported to reduce Bears Ears National Monument by more than 85%, a reduction that the tribes recognize to be, in effect, a revocation, and purported to create two much smaller national monuments in its place. The response from allies was swift and strong. This is in Salt Lake City, Utah, where the delegation loves to say there's no support for Bears Ears, and people turned out, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people in December in Utah to show the solidarity and support for tribes and for what I think us as Americans broadly, we're beginning, through this attack on public lands, it's really crystallizing our collective commitment to the commons, and we're beginning to realize, I think perhaps for the first time, that our public lands in many ways are perhaps the closest thing we have to sacred lands in this country, and we saw that with the response. So of course, litigation has ensued. The tribes, on the same day that the Trump's executive order came out, filed their complaint. Utah Diné Bikéyah, along with a team coalition of local organizations, has likewise filed suit, and a group of national conservation nonprofits with a stake in public lands has also filed. These three cases have been consolidated in the Federal District Court in DC. I'm happy to talk more about the litigation or answer questions about it. It's proceeding, but at a typical legal pace, which is to say geologic. But far and away, the body of legal scholarship leans strongly in favor of the tribe's arguments here, and I'm happy to illuminate those more. But for purposes of today, I really want to focus back on what Bears Ears has always been about, which is ensuring that these lands are still intact for current and future generations, making sure that when Mary J. Nyazi's great-great-great-grandchildren go to perform the bear dance in the springtime, that connection to Bears Ears is still a strong bond that can be maintained not just for Native people, but for all people, recognizing that our public lands are places where we all go to heal and renew, and that when tribes are involved in that process, the depth of relationship can be tremendously enhanced. And so at the end of the day, when I think about decolonizing public lands and Bears Ears, it really comes down to this concept of healing. Healing that relationship between tribes and their ancestral homelands, between the federal government and sovereign tribal nations in this country, and between people and the earth, which, as we know, is a critical turning point in our history. Willie Gray Eyes, chairman of Utah Diné Bikéyah board, has said, Bears Ears National Monument is a healing process, not only for the Native Americans, but also for the non-Native people. We offer that with open hands. So thank you so much, and thank you for listening to Bears Ears.